So we're in our final piece of design when it comes to flowcharting for our programs. And the last bit that we need to look at is being able to flowchart loops. The good thing is that we don't need any new symbols. It's all logic. We just got to use what we already know. Now we know a few different shapes. We know rounded rectangles, or ovals, kind of, which are terminals, so our start and our end point. We know rectangles, which is our processing, so any form of calculations or assigning variables, that kind of stuff. We also know parallelograms, and a parallelogram is for any input or output operations, so asking the user for information or reading in information, things along those lines. We also know diamonds, and diamonds are for decisions. So you might have a yes or no question, which is for basic if-else statements. So it might be like, is x less than 5? But then we also know diamonds for large statements where there's many options. So we have all these different options here, and that is what we call the case statement. So that's for 3 or more options. So your if, else, if, or your switch statement, depending on what how you're coding it. So it might be like case X, and here you might have like 0, you might have 5, you might have 9, you might have 14, you might have 21, right? And then you have other logic accordingly in each part. You might even have more diamonds, which then maybe branch off, and so on and so forth. So these are all the symbols we know. We are going to use these symbols in order to fully, I guess, illustrate our loops within our code. Sorry. Now, what we're going to do here, this is just taking forever here. Let me just use the lasso tool here. Not much better. Delete. There we go. Missed one. Basically, what we're going to do now is we're going to use these symbols to draw a very simple question. So here I have draw the flowchart for a simple counted loop that iterates 10 times and outputs the counter variable during each iteration. So if I were to code it, it would look something like this. For int I is equal to 0, keep looping as long as I is less than 10, I++, and inside of here just display the iteration number. So if we run it, we see we get iteration 0, iteration 1, all the way through iteration 9. So that's going to go 10 full iterations, and this is all the logic that we have here, just this basic for statement. We have a variable definition, we have our compare statement, we have our code, and we have our change. All those different operations. So let's take a look back to our OneNote here. And let's figure out how we can actually draw this. So we know that we have to start. We always start at the basics. We always start with our start terminal. So I'm going to try and draw my best rounded rectangle here. And this is our start section. Now the start section is going to lead into the logic. Now according to our statement, it says draw a flowchart that counts 10 times. It doesn't really care where the counting starts, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to create I'm going to use a variable. I'm going to start it at 0, just like we did in our logic there. So I'm going to say set I to 0. And that is a set statement, which means it is a rectangle. A very brutal rectangle, but a rectangle nonetheless. I wonder if I can convert that. No. So we've set our value. Now we need to test our value. Should we actually execute the code inside of our loop? We got to iterate 10 times. So we want to keep looping as long as I has a value of less than 10. So is I less than 10? It either is or it is not. So if it's not, I'm done my program. I've finished executing. So I have my end terminal. End. However, if it is, we're going to go this way. If it is, then I need to do what the question asks, which says display the iteration number. So I'm going to have a parallelogram that's going to say iteration plus I. We draw our parallelogram here. Now I want you to think about the way the logic works for these. So it tests the value, it displays it, and then it's going to come up and modify that I value. It's going to change the counter variable. So in here we need to change that counter variable next. So we're going to say set I to I plus 1. Alternatively, we could also just say, use our terminology, increment I. And the term increment means add 1. So that solves our problem. And this is a processing statement, so it's a straight up rectangle. And that is going to lead right from our display statement. Now the next question is, where do we go from here? Well, we don't go back into set I to 0, because that would set I back to 0 and we'd be stuck in an infinite loop, because every time at the beginning of the loop I would be 0, I would be 0, I would be 0. That doesn't solve our problem. What we're going to do is we're going to draw that line past that point and back into the flow. So you can see that we've created a cycle here. So it's going to add 1 to I, and then it's going to come back in here and it's going to test I again. Is I still less than 10? If yes, output the value, add 1 to I again. And we create this cycle. Where is my red marker, or my red point here? Let's say red here. So basically, we have this cycle that just flows and flows and flows and flows, and it's going to go 10 times, 0 through 9. And when it's all done, comes out to our end statement, and we're all complete. That's how we do our loops inside of flowcharts. Pretty straightforward. That's it.